I'm Margaret Lewin and welcome to Margaret Lewin Quilting. Today we are going to be working on block 2 of our Stitch Pink Moda Fabrics 2020 Quilt Along. If you'd like to see how I went about making block number 2, please stick around and I'll show you how. Today we're going to be putting together block 2, and I believe the name that they've given it is On the Rise. So this block consists of a lot of flying geese and fabric that are cut so that you're going to be dealing with what's called the bias quite often. The bias is the stretchy part of the grain, and I don't want to pull on this. I'm going to grab another piece of fabric and I will show you exactly what the bias is. So when you've got a triangle like this, you've got what's called the straight of grain, and then you've got what's called the bias. The straight of grain is the straight of the fabric, whether it's horizontally or vertical. Anyhow, that's where your fabric is really strong and doesn't stretch a lot. The bias is where it stretches. So you've got this triangle. See, if I pull it this way, it really isn't stretching. If I pull it this way, again, it's not stretching. If I, on the other hand, pull it this way, look at how much it's stretching. You can actually see the fiber stretch. So when we go to look at this block, which is block number 2, I want you to be aware of how many pieces of the bias we have that we're working with. We've got bias here, here, then we've got bias again, these three, these three, these three, and these three. So what you're going to want to do is control your bias as much as possible. One of the easiest ways to control the bias is to pin a lot so that you are easily feeding your fabric through underneath the presser foot. So you don't want to be pushing or pulling or twisting or anything like that. I will be sewing with my Bernina 790 Plus, and I do have the stitch regulator on mine. So I will be using foot number 97D. How I put this block together when I did the pink one was I started on the outside and I put these together. Then I started working on the inside. Then I put it all together. For this block, when I go to work on my black one, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it differently. My biggest reason for it is because Moda was wonderful enough to give us dimensions of where everything is supposed to be all the way down the road. So if by starting, see, they had you start on the outside. If by starting on the inside and working my way out, I can make sure that my block is perfectly square and it will all fit together. I love whenever I'm given dimensions of what a block is supposed to be at along the way, because then I can always square it up to make it possible to go together correctly. And what you're going to want to do, especially on this one, is you are going to want to stop in the middle or stop when you complete a section. So when I put F and E together, I'm going to make certain that I square every single one of them up along the way. Okay? I am going to start by sewing E and F together, which are these pieces here. And then I'll come back and show you what they look like and walk you through what I did to complete that stage of the block. I'm going to set this aside because what we're going to work on right now is squaring up our little geese here. We've got all these little pieces and we want to square these up first. I've got my little 5.5-inch square ruler. I like the creative grids because I like how easy they are to see. The next thing I need to do is grab my directions. I want to know what size this block is supposed to be when I get it squared up. And it's supposed to be 3.5 inches long, 2.5 inches tall. Or I'm sorry, 2 inches. Okay, now that we've gotten our blocks sewn, we've got to square them up. This squaring up process is probably the most important in putting this quilt together, because if your little blocks on the inside aren't square, there's no way your quilt on the outside is going to be square. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it this way. And the reason for that is I want my 45-degree angle, which is right here on my Creative Grids ruler. I'll turn it this way so you can see it. I want that to line up perfectly with my stitch line. I know my block is supposed to be 2 inches tall and 3.5 inches wide. So half of 3.5 is 1 3/4. So I'm going to take the diagonal line, I'm going to line it up right here with my stitch line. I'm going to make sure that my little arrow right here is at 1 3/4, and it is. The next thing I do is just double check to make sure that I have enough fabric around my block, and I'm going to trim. I'll pull this away and clean up my little mess. Now I'm going to rotate it. I no longer can match my 45-degree line, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to match it in a couple other spots. I know that my block needs to be 1 3/4 inches wide. So the very first thing I'm going to do is line up my 1/4 inch right here at 1 3/4 inches. So again, remember our block is 3.5 inches wide, 2 inches tall. Half of 3.5 is 1 3/4. So here's your 1, 1, 2, 3, that's 3/4. On a Creative Grids ruler, from the edge to here is exactly 1/4. So it makes it really easy to square up your blocks. The next thing I'm going to do is, I know I've trimmed this and I've trimmed this. So I'm going to take my ruler and just rotate it so that I am nice and square, which I am here, and that my 1 3/4 is still at the center of my block. I'm going to take my rotary cutter, I'm going to cut here and here, and now I have my block all ready to go. The nicest thing about this is when I go to put it in line with my next set of blocks, I'm not going to lose my point because I have a full 1/4 inch for my seam allowance. So I'm going to go off camera, finish up the other 3, and then I'll be back for our next step. All right, here's my next piece. And what I need to do on this is just place 1 piece on each side. And the next pieces that I need are these 4 corner blocks. Now make sure, if you're doing it the same color as I am, that you get your blocks right side up, because these are really tough sometimes to get right. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this over to my sewing table. I'm going to attach these and these, this to this, then I'll have 3 rows to all put together. I'll come on back and show you what it looks like. So here is the center block that I put together, and on this one I pressed all of my seams in. Here is the top or the bottom, whichever. I got an extra thread hanging there. We're going to get rid of that right now while we can easily. And these are going to go like this and like this. And then here's my last one, and again I pressed my seams out so that I can snuggle these seams together. So I'm going to go sew that together, then I can measure it again and make sure that I'm on target, because remember, I need it to be 6.5 inches square. So I'm going to go get that sewn together, then we're going to start putting these pieces together. All right, there is my completed block, and you can see that it's 6.5 inches square. And the next thing that I want to show you is how I press this. I'm going to flip it over. Any place I could, I tried to press like this so that the point where all of the layers are is facing down and it's open and not folded over. I did that with the exception until I got to here. And you can see I pressed these seams open. The reason why I did that is because when I go to quilt this, I want these corners where all of these intersections are to come together as flat as possible, so that when my long arm goes over it, it doesn't bump and then skip a stitch, because sometimes they do that, and I would rather they not. So now the next thing that I will do is put together my outside. All right, so now I'm going to work on these geese. So what I'm going to do is start by putting my right side down to 2 of them. So there's 1, here's 2, and then I'm just going to grab 2 wings. So I'll grab 1 from here, and I'm going to line it right up like this. What I want to do is I want these lined up so that they are nice and right together the way they belong. Then I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam, and I am sewing a scant 1/4 inch seam on all of these, all right? Every one of them is being done that way. Put right side up again, and let me grab another piece. So I'm going to attach these 4, then I'm going to set them by pressing them, then I'm going to fold it over so that my seam is against this piece of fabric. Then I'll go back and sew the second side. Just to me, I find that that is the easiest way for me to put these together. So if I get a second, I will stop in and show you what it looks like once I have sewn and pressed these, just in case you don't get what I'm saying. So I'll be right back. All right, here are my blocks that are sewn, and you can see what I did. I just sewed and then I pressed it out. So there's one of them. So now I'm going to take this one, line it up, put it down. I'll do this one, line it up. Now this one. Then my last one, and line that up. Oop. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that they're really good and lined up. Then I'll stitch them, and then I'll fold them back. Then I'm going to be back to trim them up, because these also need to be trimmed. So I'll be back in just a minute. And this is how I pressed all of them. I did them right out. So they're nice, flat, open, everything's good about them. These are supposed to measure 3.5 by 6.5 inches. So once again, I need half of the 6.5 because I want to line up my center there. Half of 6.5 is 3.25. So right here on my Creative Grids ruler is 3.25. So I'm going to use that first to line it up, and then this, I'll bring it up closer. This is actually a 1/4 inch mark on my ruler. See right here. So I'm going to line up that right here and this just above it, so that I can get this squared up nice and straight. So it looks like I am good. Alrighty, so I'm going to trim one side, then the top, clean up my mess, rotate it around, and then I'm going to do that again. I'm going to line up my 3.25, which is right here, and I need the block, 3.25 is right there, and see right here, and my block is supposed to be 6.5 by 3.5. So I'm a little short down here, but I'll be okay because I know it most of all. And then I'm going to trim this. All right, so there is my next block. I'll go through the other ones, and then we will start to put this all together. All right, these are all trimmed up. So let me grab my board. The next thing for me to do is to put all of these together. And I like going back and always laying it on my board again to make sure I'm doing it right. So I'm going to add these 2. There's my 2 to stack. And then I'm going to take my centerpiece and I'm going to add it to one side of this. Now when I sew it, I will sew from this side because I want to be able to see my little, right there, see where X marks the spot? I want that X to show on my other side when I sew. So I want to sew just next to that X. And that should be 1/4 inch. So I'll be back. And here is my final block. I'm really excited for how it looks. I think it came out really well. Some of the takeaways that I learned doing this block is to make certain that no matter what, I'm squaring up each block as I go. Because I'm dealing with so much bias in here, it's really important that you sew, number one, a scant 1/4 inch, all right? And the second thing that makes it really important is that you do take the time to square up each and every block. Here's my block that is done in the melanoma cancer way. And here is my block done as Moda has designed in the breast cancer awareness colors. So I've got blocks number 2 all completed. And once again, my last seams, I did press those open. My middle seams, when I sewed those together the last time, I did press those open. It is pretty safe nowadays to be able to, it's pretty safe nowadays to actually press your seams open. I use a pretty small stitch length. I don't have a large stitch length. I try to sew right around 1.8, right around there to 2, one or the other. And I'm using white thread on both quilts. So I'm very pleased with the way they both came out. Next block is block number 3, and I can't wait to make it with you. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video where I showed you how I put together block number 2 of Moda Fabrics 2020 Stitch Pink Quilt-along. It again is still quite a mouthful. I've got to figure out something else to come up with to call it. So if you have any ideas of what I should be calling it, leave a comment below. Give me a hand and help me out because boy is that one a tongue twister. Anyhow, this is my pink block and my black block, and here we are at this point, and I'm getting really excited. I can't wait to show you block number 3. That one's coming up tomorrow. In the meantime, if you'd like to support my channel, please do give this video a thumbs up and consider sharing it with your friends. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'll see you again tomorrow for block 3 of Moda Fabrics 2020 Stitch Pink Quilt-along. Bye everybody.